Welcome to the Oracle's Rest, a place where stories unfold slowly, where time softens, and where the mind is free to wander. Tonight, we drift out across a milk-white ocean into the mythology of Hinduism. Tonight begins with a god asleep between one world and the next, when everything that existed has been drawn back in and nothing has yet been made. There is an ocean. It has no shore. Nothing moves on it. And floating on that water is an enormous serpent with many heads, coiled into the shape of a bed and lying on the coils. One arm folded beneath his head is Vishnu. He is not unconscious. The texts are careful about this. He is in Yoga Nidra, the sleep of yoga, which is a state of rest. That is also a state of complete awareness. He is resting and he is watching, and the universe is inside him while he does it. And then, at the proper moment, a lotus grows out of his navel. It rises up through the water on a long stem and opens. And seated inside the flower is Brahma, with 4 faces looking in 4 directions. And Brahma looks around at the emptiness and begins to make the world again. Again. That word matters. And we will come back to it, because in this tradition, nothing is ever made for the first time. There is a great deal to move through tonight, and I want to say something honest before we start. Hindu mythology is not one book and not one story. It is thousands of years of texts layered on top of each other, written in different centuries, in different languages, by different communities. And they do not always agree, and they were never meant to. A story told one way in Sanskrit, in the north, is told differently in Tamil in the south, and differently again in Java or Bali or Thailand. And all of those versions are real versions. So when I say the story goes like this, I mean one of the ways it goes, where the differences are interesting. I will tell you about them. It helps to have a rough map of where the stories live. So here is one, briefly. The oldest layer is the Vedas, 4 collections of hymns and ritual material, of which the Rig Veda is the eldest and contains poetry. That has been recited continuously for something like 3,000 years, attached to them. Later are the Upanishads, which turn away from ritual and toward questions. What is the self? What happens at death? What is the thing behind everything? Then there are the two great epics, the Ramayana and the Mahabharata, which are called Itihasa, meaning roughly, so it was. And then the Puranas, a huge body of later works. And this is where most of the mythology, as people know, it actually lives. The avatars, the churning of the ocean, the goddess killing the buffalo, the family life of Shiva, 18 major ones and many minor ones, compiled over centuries, and they cheerfully contradict each other. Nothing was ever thrown out to make room for the new thing. It was all just kept. And the very oldest layer contains something I want to read you now, because it sets the tone for everything after it. There is a hymn in the Rig Veda about the beginning, and it is not confident. It says that in the beginning there was neither existence nor non-existence, neither air nor the sky beyond it. It asks what covered everything, and where, and in whose keeping. It says there was darkness concealed in darkness, and that what came to be was hidden in water. And then, at the end, having described the creation of everything, it turns and asks whether anyone actually knows, whether the one who looks down on all this from the highest heaven knows. And it allows, in its final line, that perhaps even he does not. That is one of the oldest surviving pieces of religious poetry in the world. And it ends by admitting it might be wrong. There is another hymn I will give you the shape of, because it belongs to a night like this one. It is addressed to Ratri, the night herself, arriving and filling the whole sky, putting away the distances, setting the stars out. The poet asks her to be kind, to take the darkness off him, to keep the wolf and the thief away, and to pass over easily, and to let him come through to the other side of her and see the morning. People have been asking the night for that for 3,000 years, in more or less those words. And the lotus is only one of the accounts. There are others sitting alongside it, and none of them was ever retired. One says that in the beginning there was a golden egg, or a golden womb, Hiranyagarbha, floating in the waters, and that it held everything, and that it opened. Another says that the world was made from a single enormous being called Purusha, who was offered up and whose body became the parts of the world, the moon, from his mind, the sun from his eye, the wind from his breath, the sky from his head, the earth from his feet. Another says that everything comes out of a single syllable, and another, the one we started with, says a god sleeps on a serpent and dreams a flower with a maker in it. They are all in the same tradition, and they are all still recited, and this bothers nobody, because they are not understood to be competing reports of an event. They are attempts at something that does not fit into a sentence. And having 4 attempts is better than having 1. Let us stay with the sleeping god a little longer, because his bed has a name. The serpent is called Shesha, which means the remainder, or what is left over. He is what remains when everything else has gone. He is also called Ananta, the Endless One. He has many heads, 1,000 in the fullest descriptions, spread above the sleeper like a canopy. And in the images, he holds them there patiently, keeping the light off the god's face. And when the world is unmade at the end of a cycle, Shesha is what stays. He is the leftover, floating on the water, waiting. Now, about that cycle, Hindu cosmology thinks in spans of time that are genuinely difficult for a person to hold in their head, and it does it deliberately. Time is not a line here, it is a wheel, and it turns, and it has been turning for a very long time. The smallest unit that matters for our purposes is the yuga, an age of the world. There are 4 of them, and they run in order, and each is worse than the one before. The first is Satya Yuga, also called Krita Yuga, the age of truth. Everything is as it should be. People live enormously long lives. Dharma, which we might loosely translate as rightness, or the proper order of things, stands firm on all 4 legs, like a bull. Then comes Treta Yuga, and the bull is standing on 3 legs. Then Dvapara Yuga, and it is standing on 2. And then Kali Yuga, the age we are said to be in now, and Dharma is balanced on 1 leg, and everything is shorter and harder and more confused. The texts are quite funny about it in places, in a bleak way. In the Kali age, they say people will be judged by their wealth. Rulers will take rather than give. Learning will be for sale. The 4 together make a Mahayuga, a great age. and it lasts something in the region of 4,320,000 years. 1,000 of those make one day of Brahma, a single day, and his night is the same length again. And during the night, everything is drawn back in, and the ocean returns, and the serpent floats, and the god sleeps. And in the morning, the lotus opens again. Brahma lives 100 of his own years, and then even he ends, and another begins. The point of these numbers is not that anyone was counting. The point is scale. Whatever is worrying you tonight is happening somewhere, inside an afternoon of a very long day, in a cycle that has already happened more times than can be counted, and will happen again, which is a strangely restful thought, if you let it be. There is one story that lets a human being actually see this happen, and it is the one I would keep if I could keep only one. A sage named Markandeya had been granted an extraordinarily long life, long enough to live through the end of a world. And when the dissolution came, and the fires burned out, and the waters rose and covered everything, he was still alive and found himself floating alone on a shoreless ocean in the dark, with nothing anywhere. He swam or drifted for what the text describes as an unimaginable stretch of time, exhausted, frightened, entirely alone in the water. And then he saw a light, and in the light, floating on the surface, there was a single banyan leaf, and lying on the leaf was an infant, glowing softly, apparently perfectly content. Markandeya could not understand it. Everything that existed had been destroyed, and here was a baby on a leaf, alone on the ocean, and unbothered. And as he came closer, the child breathed in, and Markandeya was drawn in with the breath. And inside the child, he found the whole world: mountains, rivers, forests, cities, oceans, the sky, all of it intact, all of it going on. He wandered through it for a long time, and then the child breathed out, and he was outside again, on the dark water, with the leaf in front of him. Everything that had been lost was inside, the sleeping child the whole time, being kept. That image, an infant asleep, on a leaf, on an endless sea, holding the universe safe. Inside a breath is one of the tenderest things in any mythology I know of. It is the same idea as the god on the serpent, told softly enough for a child to hold. Nothing is destroyed. It is only put down for the night. Let us go back to the milk ocean, because the most famous single episode in all of Hindu mythology takes place there. And it starts with a problem. The Devas, the gods, had grown weak. There had been a curse in most tellings, and their strength was draining away, and their old rivals, the Asuras, were winning. The Asuras are usually translated as demons, which is not quite right. They are the other side of the family. They are the same kind of being, born of the same lineage, wanting the same things, and often more disciplined and more devout than the gods themselves. So, Vishnu gave the gods an instruction that must have sounded absurd. Go and make peace with your enemies, he said, and churn the ocean together, and out of it will come Amrita, the nectar of immortality. And so they did. They took Mount Mandara and used it as the churning staff. They took the great serpent Vasuki and wrapped him around the mountain as the rope. The gods held the tail, the Asuras, who were persuaded to take the head end and who did not enjoy it, held the neck, and they pulled back and forth, one side and then the other, exactly the way butter is churned in a village, which is the ordinary domestic image. The whole cosmic scene is built on. The mountain began to sink into the seabed. So Vishnu took the form of an enormous tortoise, Kurma, and went down and set the mountain on his back. And it turned there for 1,000 years, and things began to come up out of the water. The first thing that came up was not a treasure. It was poison, a vast, dark cloud of it, called Halahala, boiling out of the ocean, spreading across the sky. And it was going to kill everything. And everyone ran to Shiva. Shiva gathered the poison and drank it, all of it, and his wife, Parvati, in terror, seized his throat with both hands to stop it going down into his body and into the world it contained. So the poison stopped there and stayed there, and it turned his throat blue. That is why Shiva is called Nilakantha, the blue-throated one. He is holding it still. After the poison, the treasures came. The moon, the wish-fulfilling cow Kamadhenu, the white elephant, Airavata, with his many tusks, who became Indra's mount, the seven-headed horse, Uchchaishravas, the Parijata tree, whose flowers never wilt, the jewel Kaustubha, which Vishnu wears on his chest, the Apsaras, the celestial dancers rising out of the foam, Varuni, the goddess of wine, and Lakshmi, the goddess of fortune and abundance, standing on a lotus, who came out of that ocean and looked at everyone assembled, gods and asuras alike, and chose Vishnu, the wish-fulfilling tree Kalpavriksha, the conch, and in some accounts the goddess of misfortune came up as well, before her sister, and had to be found somewhere to live, because a churning that produces everything produces that too, and the story does not pretend otherwise. And then, at last, the physician of the gods, Dhanvantari, rising up out of the water holding a pot, the Amrita, and the truce ended instantly. The Asuras seized the pot and ran. What happened next is one of the great pieces of trickery in the tradition. Vishnu took the form of Mohini, a woman of overwhelming beauty, and appeared among the Asuras and offered to settle the dispute fairly. She would distribute the nectar herself, she said, to both sides in turn, and they were so taken with her that they handed over the pot. She sat the gods in one row and the Asuras in another, and she began to serve, and she served the gods. One Asura saw what was happening. He slipped into the row of gods in disguise and sat between the sun and the moon and took the nectar and swallowed it. And the sun and the moon recognized him and cried out. And Vishnu threw his discus and cut off his head, but the nectar had already passed his throat, so the head could not die, and the body could not die, and both of them are still up there. The head is called Rahu, and the body is called Ketu, and they have been chasing the sun and the moon across the sky ever since, because those two gave him away. And every so often, Rahu catches one of them and swallows it, and there is darkness. And then the light comes out again through his severed neck, because he has no body to hold it. That is an eclipse. I find that one of the most satisfying explanatory myths anywhere, because it accounts for the darkness and for its shape and for why it always passes. Let us talk about Vishnu properly now, because he does not stay asleep. Vishnu is the preserver. When the world tips too far, when Dharma is failing badly enough, he comes down into it. The word for that descent is avatara, which simply means a crossing down. And it is where our word avatar comes from. There are traditionally 10, though the lists vary, and the order in which they come is quietly remarkable. The first is Matsya, a fish. There is a flood coming that will cover everything, and a righteous man named Manu is washing his hands in a river when a tiny fish swims into his palms and asks for protection. He puts it in a jar. It outgrows the jar. He moves it to a tank, and it outgrows the tank, and then a lake, and then a river, and finally he releases it into the sea, and by then it is enormous, and it tells him what is coming, and tells him to build a boat. When the flood comes, Manu ties the boat to the horn of the fish and is towed through the water until it recedes. Every living seed and every sacred text is on board with him. The second is Kurma, the tortoise, who we have already met holding up the mountain. The third is Varaha, a boar. The earth has been dragged down beneath the cosmic ocean, and Vishnu takes the form of a boar and dives, and finds her, and brings her up balanced on his tusks. The fourth is Narasimha, and this one is a proper story. There was an Asura king named Hiranyakashipu who had performed such severe austerities that he had been granted a boon of near invulnerability. He could not be killed by man or beast, nor by any weapon, nor indoors or outdoors, nor by day or by night, nor on the ground or in the sky. He had thought about it carefully. He believed he had covered everything, and his own son, Prahlada, was a devotee of Vishnu, which enraged him beyond reason. He tried to have the boy killed repeatedly, and every attempt failed. Finally, he demanded to know where this god of his was, and whether he was in the pillar of the hall, and struck the pillar, and the pillar split, and what came out was neither man nor beast, but a lion-headed man. And he took the king to the threshold of the doorway, which is neither indoors nor outdoors, and laid him across his lap. So he was neither on the ground nor in the sky, and did it at twilight, which is neither day nor night, and killed him with his claws, which are not weapons. Every clause of the boon honoured exactly, and every one of them turned. That same king had a sister named Holika, who was proof against fire, and who took the boy Prahlada into a bonfire on her lap to kill him, and the fire took her instead, and left him sitting in the ashes, unhurt. That is the bonfire lit on the eve of Holi. Still, every spring, a fire built to burn up the thing. That meant a child harm. The fifth is Vamana, a dwarf, and it is my favorite of them because the trick is gentler. Another Asura king, Bali, had conquered the 3 worlds. But Bali was good. He was generous and just, and famous for never refusing a request. Vishnu came to his sacrifice as a small brahmin boy and asked for a very modest gift, as much land as he could cover in 3 steps. Bali laughed and granted it, and the boy began to grow. With his first step, he covered the whole earth. With his second, he covered the sky and everything above it. And then he stopped and asked where he should place the third. And Bali, who understood by then exactly who he was talking to, bowed his head and offered it. So the third step was placed on Bali's head and pressed him gently down into the underworld to rule there. And because his generosity had been real, he was granted the right to return and visit his people once every year. In Kerala, that return is still celebrated, and the festival of Onam is his homecoming. The 6th is Parashurama, an axe-bearing warrior, and he is the hinge of the sequence, the first fully human one, and a violent one who clears away a corrupt warrior class and then withdraws. Look back along the order and something odd emerges. A fish, then a tortoise, which lives in water and on land, then a boar, fully on land, then a creature half lion and half man, then a human, but a dwarf, then a human of full stature, but wild, with an axe, then a king, then a statesman and teacher, water to amphibian, to animal, to half human, to small human, to complete human, to civilized human. People have been noticing that shape for a long time, and it is worth being careful about it. Nobody who compiled these lists was proposing a theory of biology, and the sequence was assembled from separate local traditions over centuries. But it is a genuinely striking order to have arrived at, and the noticing is fair as long as the claim stays modest. The 7th is Rama, the 8th is Krishna, the 9th, in many lists, is the Buddha, which is itself a remarkable piece of accommodation, folding the founder of another tradition into your own as one of your God's descents. And the 10th, Kalki, has not happened yet. He is to come at the end of this age, riding a white horse, when things have gone as far as they can go. Rama and Krishna each carry an enormous story, so let us take them slowly. The Ramayana is the older of the two great epics, attributed to the sage Valmiki, and it has been retold in dozens of languages across a very wide part of the world. Rama is the eldest son of the king of Ayodhya, and he is about to be crowned when one of his father's other queens calls in 2 old promises. She asks that her own son be made king instead, and that Rama be exiled to the forest for 14 years. The king is destroyed by this and cannot refuse it. And Rama, who is the story's whole argument about duty, accepts it without protest and goes. His wife Sita goes with him, and so does his brother Lakshmana. And for a long while the forest years are not unhappy. They live simply. They visit sages. The story slows down and breathes. Then Sita is taken. Ravana, the 10-headed king of Lanka, a scholar and a musician and a formidable devotee of Shiva, as well as a villain, carries her off through the sky in a flying chariot. An old vulture named Jatayu, a friend of Rama's father, sees it happening and attacks the chariot, alone, though he is far too old, and Ravana cuts off his wings. Rama finds him dying and holds him and hears what happened, and that small scene is one of the most affecting in the whole epic. And so the search begins, and it brings in the monkeys, and it brings in Hanuman. Hanuman is the son of the wind. As a baby, so the story goes, he saw the sun in the sky, thought it was a ripe fruit, and leapt up to eat it. He was struck down for that, and his father, the wind, withdrew from the world in grief, until the gods relented and loaded the child with gifts. But a curse came with them. he would forget his own strength and be unable to use it, until someone reminded him what he could do, which is why, again and again in the story, Hanuman sits at the edge of an impossible task, looking uncertain, until somebody says, "You can do this. You have always been able to do this." And then he does something enormous. He crosses the ocean to Lanka in a single leap to find Sita. Later, sent to fetch a particular healing herb from a mountain in the Himalayas. He cannot tell which plant it is, so he picks up the entire mountain and carries it back through the air. There is a story about Hanuman that is told to explain what he is for. He had been given a necklace of pearls as a reward, and he was seen pulling it apart and biting each pearl and throwing it away. Asked what on earth he was doing, he said he was looking inside each one to see whether Rama was in it, and that anything without Rama in it was of no use to him. And when someone asked, reasonably, whether Rama was inside him, he tore open his own chest, and in the images that come from this, there they are, Rama and Sita, seated inside him. He is also one of the figures said never to have died. The belief is that Hanuman is still here, still somewhere on the earth, and will remain as long as the story of Rama is still being told anywhere, which is why, in some tellings, a seat is left empty for him at any public recitation of the Ramayana, on the ground that he will certainly have come to listen. An army is built. A causeway of stones is laid across the sea to Lanka. There is a long war, and Ravana is killed, and Sita is recovered, and the 14 years end, and they come home to Ayodhya, and the people of the city, hearing they are coming, light rows of small oil lamps along every wall and every path to guide them in through the dark. That is one of the traditional origins of Diwali, the festival of lights. A line of little flames put out by ordinary people, so that someone lost can find the way back. The Ramayana does not end there, and the ending is not comfortable. In the portion that comes after the homecoming, Rama hears that his people are gossiping about Sita's time in Ravana's household, and as king rather than as husband, he sends her away, pregnant, into the forest. She is taken in at the hermitage of the sage Valmiki, the poet who is telling the story. And there she raises their twin sons, Lava and Kusha, who grow up and learn the epic of their own father from Valmiki without knowing it is about them, and eventually sing it back to Rama in his own court. And when Rama at last asks Sita to return and swear publicly to her purity one more time, she refuses. She calls instead on her mother, the earth, because Sita was found in a furrow, not born, and asks to be taken back. And the ground opens, and she goes down, and it closes. The tradition has argued about that ending for 2,000 years, and many retellings soften it or leave it out entirely. That argument is itself part of the story now. And there are a great many retellings. Kamban wrote it in Tamil. Tulsidas wrote it in Awadhi, and his version is the one recited across much of northern India. It travels. The Ramakien is the national epic of Thailand, and there are Javanese and Balinese and Malay and Cambodian and Lao versions, and in several of them the characters shift. Ravana, in particular, is not always a monster. In some Southern and Southeast Asian tellings, he is a tragic figure. And even in the Sanskrit epic, he is a great scholar and a formidable musician. There is a story that he once tore out his own sinews to string an instrument and sang to Shiva until Shiva relented and forgave him for trying to lift Mount Kailasa off the ground. The villain of the story is also one of its finest devotees. The tradition does not tidy that up. The Mahabharata is the other epic, and it is vast. One of the longest poems in the world, many times the length of the Iliad and the Odyssey combined, and it contains inside itself whole other works, including the Bhagavad Gita. Its spine is a family quarrel, two sets of cousins, the 5 Pandava brothers and the 100 Kaurava brothers, and a disputed throne. The Kauravas invite the Pandavas to a game of dice, which is rigged. The eldest Pandava, Yudhishthira, cannot stop playing. He loses his wealth, then his kingdom, then his brothers, then himself, and finally he stakes and loses their shared wife, Draupadi. What follows in that hall is the moment the entire war grows out of. Draupadi is dragged in and humiliated in front of an assembly of elders who all know it is wrong and none of whom stop it. She asks a question that nobody in the room can answer, if he had already lost himself. By what right did he then wager her? There is silence, and the silence of the good men. In that room is what the epic never forgives. The Pandavas are exiled. They come back. Negotiation fails, mostly over a demand for 5 villages that is refused, and both sides gather at Kurukshetra. And on the morning of the battle, Arjuna, the greatest archer alive, looks across at the other army and sees his cousins, his teachers, his grandfather, and puts down his bow and says he cannot do it. His charioteer is Krishna, and what Krishna says to him there on the field between the two armies, with everything waiting, is the Bhagavad Gita. There is one moment in it worth describing, because it is pure mythology rather than philosophy. Arjuna asks to see who he is really talking to, and Krishna tells him that ordinary eyes cannot do it, and gives him another kind of sight. And what Arjuna sees is a form with countless arms and countless faces, filling the whole of space, without beginning or middle or end, blazing like 1,000 suns rising at once, containing every being that has ever existed, and in among them all the armies on both sides of the field going into its mouths and being ground up, all ready before the fighting has started. He is terrified. He has been chatting with his cousin about tactics for years. He asks him to stop and to go back to the form he knows. And Krishna does, and puts a hand on him and tells him not to be afraid. That is the most quoted passage in the text, and its actual dramatic content is a man being shown far too much and asking politely to be allowed to unsee it. It is the most read and most commented on text in the tradition, and I am not going to pretend to summarize its philosophy, but its situation is worth holding. The whole conversation happens in a pause. 2 armies stopped. One frightened man in a chariot, and a friend who turns out to be far more than a friend, explaining what to do when every available choice is terrible. The war lasts 18 days and nearly everyone dies. Bhishma, the great uncle of both sides, is brought down by so many arrows that he does not touch the ground when he falls. He lies on the bed they make, and because he had been granted the power to choose the hour of his own death, he stays there through the rest of the war and afterward, waiting for the sun to turn north at the winter solstice before letting go. Karna, who fought on the wrong side, is revealed at the end to have been the eldest Pandava brother all along, abandoned as a newborn and raised by a charioteer. His brothers learn who he was only after they have killed him. And there is Ekalavya from earlier in the story. A boy from a forest tribe refused instruction by the great teacher Drona because of his birth, who set up a clay image of Drona in the woods and taught himself in front of it until he was better than any of the princes. And when Drona discovered this, he claimed his teacher's fee and asked for the boy's right thumb, and the boy gave it. The epic tells you that story without comment and lets it sit there, which is more damning than any comment would be. There is a figure who moves between all of these stories and belongs to none of them, and he deserves a mention: Narada. He is a sage who travels constantly between the worlds, carrying a stringed instrument, singing, and turning up wherever something is about to happen. And what he mostly does is talk. He tells one party what another party said. He mentions, in passing, the thing that will set everything off. A great many plots in the Puranas begin with Narada arriving somewhere and making an observation. He is not malicious. The tradition is clear that everything he stirs up needed to happen, and that he knows exactly what he is doing. But he is, functionally, the reason the story starts. Over and over, across centuries of literature, a wandering musician who cannot help mentioning things. At the very end, after everything, the surviving brothers walk into the Himalayas to die. One by one, they fall on the path. Only Yudhishthira keeps going, with a dog that has followed him the whole way. Indra comes with a chariot to carry him to heaven, and Yudhishthira says he will come, but the dog comes too. Indra refuses. There are no dogs in heaven. And Yudhishthira, who lost a kingdom and a wife and every brother he had, says that he will not abandon something that has been loyal to him. Not for heaven, not for anything. And the dog is Dharma, his own father in disguise. And it was the last test, and he has passed it. Let us go back and pick up Krishna as a child, because that Krishna is a completely different flavor of story, and a much lighter one. He grows up among cowherds in Vrindavan, hidden there as an infant to escape a king, who has been told that his sister's 8th child will kill him. And the child, Krishna, is a menace. He steals butter, This is his defining crime, and there are endless stories about it. The pots hung from the ceiling out of reach, the ladder of friends, the butter on the face, the small boy insisting to his mother that he has done nothing at all, while entirely covered in evidence. Once his foster mother Yashoda hears he has been eating dirt and orders him to open his mouth. He opens it, and inside she sees the sky and the stars and the oceans and all of space and time turning, and herself in it, holding a child and looking into his mouth. And then she forgets, because it would not be bearable to remember, and goes back to being cross about the dirt. He grows a little and plays the flute in the evenings, and the sound of it draws the cowherd women out of their houses, and there is dancing by the river under a full moon. And in one telling he multiplies himself, so that each of them is dancing with him alone. When the god Indra sends a punishing storm on the village, Krishna lifts the entire hill of Govardhana on the little finger of one hand and holds it over the people like an umbrella for 7 days. And when a poisonous serpent named Kaliya fouls a bend in the river, Krishna dives in and dances on his hoods until the creature yields, and then spares him and sends him away. Because Krishna very rarely simply destroys anything. His own ending, long after the war, is quiet and almost accidental. The Yadavas, his own people, destroy themselves in a drunken quarrel on a beach, and Krishna walks away from it into a forest and lies down under a tree to rest, with one foot raised across his knee, and a hunter, some way off, sees the sole of that foot through the leaves and takes it for the ear of a deer and shoots. And the man comes running when he sees what he has done, and Krishna comforts him and tells him it was always going to happen this way, and dies of it. And by the tradition's reckoning, the moment he left the world is the moment Kali Yuga began, the age we are in, the one balanced on a single leg. The current age starts with a good thing, leaving quietly, and a decent man's honest mistake. Now, Shiva, who has been standing at the edge of all this since the poison, Shiva is the third of the great trio, alongside Brahma, the maker, and Vishnu, the preserver, and he is usually named as the destroyer, which needs qualifying immediately. He does not destroy out of malice. He dissolves He ends things so that they can begin, which in a cyclical universe is not the opposite of creation, but a stage of it. He sits on Mount Kailasa in the high Himalayas, covered in ash, with matted hair, a crescent moon caught in it, a snake around his neck, and a third eye in his forehead. He is the supreme ascetic, and he is also a husband and a father, and the tradition is entirely comfortable with him being both. His most famous image is Nataraja, the lord of the dance, and every part of it is doing something. He stands inside a ring of flame, one leg planted, the other lifted across his body, with 4 arms. In the upper right hand, he holds a small hourglass-shaped drum, and the drum is sound, and sound is the beginning of things. In the upper left, he holds a flame, and the flame is the dissolution at the end. Creation in one hand and destruction in the other, held level, at the same height, neither winning. The lower right hand is raised palm out in the gesture that means, do not be afraid. The lower left points down at the raised foot, which is the foot of release, and beneath the planted foot there is a small figure, a dwarf, being stood on. He is usually identified as forgetfulness or heedlessness, the state of not paying attention, not an enemy, just the thing that has to be under your weight. Before you can dance, the whole universe is coming into being and ending inside that ring of fire continuously. And the face at the center of it is completely calm. There is another image of him worth knowing, called Ardhanarishvara, in which the body is split vertically down the middle. The right half is Shiva, and the left half is Parvati, in one figure, one earring on one side, and a different one on the other. One half with a broad chest, and one with a breast, one foot in an anklet. Not a couple standing together, one person, made of both, which is the point being argued. At the door of every Shiva temple, facing in, there is a bull. That is Nandi, his mount and his gatekeeper, and he is always lying down, always looking toward the sanctuary, waiting. People whisper their requests into his ear on the way past, so that he can pass them along. There is a story about how Brahma and Vishnu once argued over which of them was greater, and a pillar of fire appeared before them, with no visible top and no visible bottom. they agreed to settle it by finding the ends. Vishnu took the form of a boar and dug downward for 1,000 years and found nothing. Brahma took the form of a swan and flew up for 1,000 years and found nothing either. Vishnu came back and admitted he had failed. Brahma came back and claimed he had reached the top, and the pillar opened, and Shiva was in it. And for that lie, Brahma lost his worship, which is one of the explanations given for why Brahma, who makes the entire world, has almost no temples of his own anywhere. Shiva's third eye is not for seeing, it is for burning. When the god of desire, Kama, shot an arrow at him to interrupt his meditation, Shiva opened it and reduced him to ash on the spot, and later relented and allowed Kama to exist again, but without a body, which is why desire is said to be everywhere and to have no form you can point at. The story of Sati is the darkest one attached to him, and it explains a great deal about the geography of pilgrimage in India. Sati was his first wife, and her father Daksha despised him and staged a great sacrifice to which every god was invited except Shiva. Sati went anyway and was insulted there and gave up her body in the sacrificial fire. And Shiva, when he found her, carried her body and would not put it down, and walked, and the walking became a dance that began to shake the world apart. So Vishnu followed behind him and cut the body away piece by piece with his discus until there was nothing left to carry, and every place a piece fell became a Shakti Pitha, a seat of the goddess, and they are scattered right across the subcontinent, and people still go to them. She returns as Parvati, daughter of the mountain, and wins him back through years of austerity, so severe that the gods themselves become alarmed, and their sons are two of the most beloved figures in the whole tradition. Ganesha first, because everyone knows him, and the story of his head is stranger than people expect. Parvati wanted to bathe undisturbed, and there was nobody she trusted to keep the door. So she took the turmeric paste from her own skin and formed a boy from it, and gave him life, and told him to let no one in. And Shiva came home. The boy did not know him and refused him entry. Shiva did not know the boy, and it escalated the way these things do between a stranger at the door and a guard who will not move. And Shiva cut off his head. Parvati's grief was such that the world was in danger. Shiva sent his attendants out with instructions to bring back the head of the first creature they found. And they came back with an elephant, and it was set on the boy's shoulders, and he lived. He is Ganesha, the remover of obstacles, invoked at the start of any undertaking, at the top of manuscripts, at the beginning of journeys and weddings and new account books. He is also, and this is the part people tend to miss, the placer of obstacles as well as their remover. The same power does both. Things are put in your way by the same hand that clears them, which is a more interesting idea than a God who simply makes life easier. His mount is a mouse, which sits at his feet in every image, and the pairing is deliberately absurd. The largest head in the pantheon riding the smallest possible animal. The usual reading is that the mouse is the thing that gets into everywhere, through any gap, and gnaws quietly at what you have stored, and that it is under control and waiting and looking up. One of his tusks is broken, and there are several explanations. And the one I like best is that when the sage Vyasa needed a scribe to take down the Mahabharata, Ganesha agreed on the condition that Vyasa never pause in the dictation. Vyasa agreed on the condition that Ganesha never write anything he did not understand. And somewhere in the middle of that enormous poem, the pen broke. And rather than stop, Ganesha snapped off his own tusk and kept writing. His brother is Kartikeya, called Murugan in the south, a young warrior god born to lead the divine armies, worshipped enormously in Tamil country, riding a peacock. There is a story about the two brothers and a race. A fruit was offered as the prize to whichever of them could go around the world first. Kartikeya set off at once on his peacock. Ganesha, who is round and rides a mouse, thought about it, and then walked in a slow circle around his mother and father, and sat down. "You are my world," he said. He got the fruit. Now the goddess, who is not simply somebody's wife. There is a whole current of the tradition in which the feminine is the fundamental power of the universe, called Shakti, and the male gods are inert without it. The great myth here is Durga. There was a buffalo demon named Mahishasura who could not be defeated by any man or god. The boon he had asked for had covered that, and he had not thought to include women, because it did not occur to him. and he had conquered heaven. So the gods, defeated, gathered together, and from each of them a stream of light came out, and the light combined, and standing in it was a woman. Each god gave her a weapon. Shiva his trident, Vishnu his discus, Indra his thunderbolt, and on through all of them, so that she had many arms and something in each hand. The mountain gave her a lion to ride, and she went out laughing and fought him for 9 days, while he changed shape again and again. And on the 10th, she killed him. Those 10 days are still marked every autumn, and there is a quieter figure standing behind her, called Mahishasura's own devotion in some southern tellings, where the buffalo demon is not simply a monster either. In parts of the country, he is remembered sympathetically as a just ruler of his own people, and the festival is observed differently there. The same 10 days, read from the other side, and from Durga's forehead, in a later part of the same text, when her anger reaches its height. Another goddess steps out, Kali, black as the night before creation, gaunt, wearing a garland of severed heads and a skirt of arms. With her tongue out, she is terrifying by design, and she is also to millions of people simply Ma, Mother, the one you can be completely honest with. Her devotional poetry is startlingly intimate, full of complaint and affection and exasperation, addressed to a figure standing in a cremation ground. There is a famous image of her standing on Shiva's chest with her tongue out, and one of the explanations is that in the frenzy, after the battle, her dancing was going to destroy the world, and Shiva lay down in her path, and she stepped on him without seeing, and then looked down and recognized her husband and stopped and bit her tongue in embarrassment. The destroyer of worlds, caught out, going quiet. There is a detail in the Durga story I have always found quietly funny and quietly serious at once. When the demon changed into a buffalo and she severed its head, a warrior began to emerge from the neck of the falling body, and she caught him halfway out, still emerging, and finished it there. He is almost always shown at that exact instant in the sculpture, a small human figure coming out of the neck of a buffalo, with her spear already in him, caught in the act of trying a different shape. And the text this comes from, the Devi Mahatmya, does something unusual It frames the whole thing as a story told to two men who have lost everything, a king driven out by his own ministers, and a merchant thrown out by his own family, who have met in a forest and cannot stop thinking about the people who wronged them. A sage tells them about the goddess in order to explain why they cannot let go and what could. So the great war myth of the tradition is delivered as consolation to two ordinary people sitting in the woods, unable to sleep for turning things over. Beside Durga and Kali stand the other two great goddesses, Lakshmi, of fortune and beauty and abundance, who came out of the milk ocean on her lotus, and Saraswati, of speech and learning and music, seated on a white swan with a stringed instrument across her lap, who is the patron of everyone who has ever tried to write something down. The swan is chosen for a specific reason. There is an old claim, entirely untrue as ornithology and rather good as an image, that a swan given a mixture of milk and water can drink off the milk and leave the water behind. So the bird stands for the faculty of separating what matters from what it is dissolved in, which is what learning is supposed to be for. And the three of them are frequently described as one goddess appearing in three modes rather than three separate persons: abundance, learning, and power, which are the three things you would actually want a word about where all of this is happening, because the geography is as elaborate as the calendar. At the center of the world stands Mount Meru, a golden mountain of enormous height, around which the sun and the planets circle. Around Meru lies the continent of Jambudvipa, named for the rose apple tree, and around that a ring of ocean, and around that another continent, and another ocean, out through 7 of each. And the oceans are not all salt water. One is milk, one is curds, one is clarified butter, one is sugarcane juice, one is wine, one is fresh water. Above Meru rise the higher worlds, and at the top is the realm of Brahma. Below lie 7 descending worlds, called the Patalas, which are the underworlds, though they are not places of punishment. They are described as beautiful, full of jeweled palaces, gardens and lakes, and lit by the gems on the hoods of the serpents who live there. One text remarks that the residents are perfectly happy and that nobody there is in any hurry to leave. And there is one more piece of cosmic geography from the Bhagavad Gita that I have always liked. It describes the world as a great tree, but growing the wrong way up, with its roots in the sky and its branches spreading downward, its leaves the verses of the hymns, an upside down tree fed from above, with everything we can see hanging off the ends of it. Let us go further back now, because the gods we have been talking about were not always the main ones. And this is a genuinely interesting thing about the tradition. The oldest layer is the Vedic, and in the Rig Veda, which contains some of the oldest religious poetry still in use anywhere in the world, the biggest god by a wide margin is Indra. Indra is the storm king. He carries the Vajra, the thunderbolt, and he drinks enormous quantities of soma. And his defining act is the killing of Vritra. Vritra is a serpent, and he has coiled around the mountains and is holding all the waters of the world inside them. Nothing flows, nothing grows, and Indra, fortified with soma, strikes him with the thunderbolt and splits him open, and the 7 rivers are released and run down to the sea. That is the central Vedic story, and it is a storm myth. The god of thunder kills the serpent who is withholding water, and the rain comes. In those old hymns, Vishnu is a minor figure who takes 3 strides, and Shiva is barely there at all under that name. Over the following centuries, they rise to become supreme, and Indra sinks to being a rather fallible king of a lesser heaven who spends much of his later career being embarrassed, sending nervous distractions to any human whose meditation is becoming too powerful, and getting a hill held up against him by a small boy in Vrindavan. Whole pantheons quietly change rank over 1,000 years, and the older texts are not discarded. They are still recited. Both things are true at once, and nobody is troubled by it. Some of the other Vedic figures stayed important. Agni is fire. He is the mouth through which the gods eat, since anything offered into the flame goes to them, which makes him the messenger and the priest and the go-between. The very first word of the Rig Veda is his name. Surya is the sun, crossing the sky in a chariot drawn by 7 horses, driven by a charioteer with no legs. There is a story that his wife could not bear his brilliance and left a shadow double of herself in her place, and went away to the forest. And that, when this was discovered, Surya was ground down on a wheel to make him bearable to look at, and the fragments filed off him were made into weapons for the gods. Chandra is the moon, and married the 27 daughters of Daksha, who are the 27 lunar mansions the moon passes through in a month. But he loved one of them best and neglected the rest. And their father cursed him to waste away. When the sentence was softened, it became a cycle instead. He wastes and returns, wastes and returns, forever. Vayu is the wind, and Hanuman's father, and also the breath. The same word covers the air outside and the air in your chest. So, the wind, God, is never entirely somewhere else. Varuna presides over the waters and over oaths and sees everything. Ushas is the dawn, and some of the loveliest poetry in the Rig Veda is addressed to her, arriving again each morning, always young, having outlived everyone who ever watched her. And Yama was the first human being to die, which is why he rules the dead. He went first and found the road, and so he keeps it. Two of the best stories in the whole tradition are conversations with him, and in both of them, somebody talks him round. The first is Nachiketa, a boy whose father was giving away his possessions as a religious offering, and giving away only the worn-out ones, old cows past milking. The boy, needling him, asked who he intended to give his son to. His father, irritated, said, "To death," and the boy took it seriously and went. Yama was not at home, so Nachiketa sat down at the door and waited 3 days and 3 nights without food. And when death returned and found a young brahmin guest unfed on his threshold, he was appalled and offered 3 boons in apology. The boy asked first that his father's anger be gone and that he be welcomed home. Granted. He asked second about a particular fire ritual. Granted. And then he asked the third, when a person dies, some say they still exist and some say they do not. Tell me which. And Yama tried everything to get out of it. He offered him sons and grandsons, herds of cattle, elephants and horses and gold, land, long life, beautiful companions, anything at all, anything but that question. And the boy said, all of those things wear out. All of them wear out your senses, even at their longest. And even the longest life is short. Keep your horses. Answer the question. And death, having no way out, taught him. The second is Savitri, who chose a husband named Satyavan, knowing, because a sage had told her plainly, that he had 1 year to live. She married him anyway. On the appointed day, she went into the forest with him, and when he lay down with a pain in his head and stopped breathing, she saw a figure come for him, and it was Yama himself, come in person because of who Satyavan was. He took the soul and started south, and Savitri followed on foot. He told her to go back. She kept walking. He told her the living cannot walk this road. She kept walking, and she talked as she went about duty, about righteousness, about the nature of the good. And she was so courteous and so relentless that death began granting her boons simply to be rid of her, on the single condition that she not ask for her husband's life. She asked for her father-in-law's sight to be restored. Granted. She asked for his kingdom back. Granted. She asked for her own father to have sons. Granted. And still she walked. And finally, worn down, he told her to ask one more thing, anything, and then leave. And she asked for 100 children of her own, and Yama granted it and told her to go home. And she stood there and did not move, and pointed out, gently and with enormous politeness, that he was still holding her husband. And death laughed and gave him back. And there is Soma, which is a god and a plant and a drink all at once. It was pressed between stones, strained through wool, mixed with milk, and drunk at the sacrifice. And the hymns about it are exhilarated. In a way, the rest of the collection is not. One of them is sung from inside the experience, the singer announcing that he has drunk it and is now enormous, that the two worlds are not equal to one wing of him, that he is going to pick up the earth and put it somewhere. Nobody now knows for certain what plant it was. The identification has been argued over for 2 centuries and remains open. The drink outlived the plant, became identified with the moon, and Soma is the moon's other name. Around and between them move a great population of other beings. The Nagas, serpent people, who live in an underworld of jeweled palaces and are connected with water and rain and hidden treasure, and who are not evil. The Gandharvas, celestial musicians, the Apsaras, dancers of the court of heaven, who are frequently dispatched to interrupt someone's meditation and who occasionally fall in love with the mortals they were sent to distract, and Garuda, the eagle, Vishnu's mount, who was born knowing what he was and whose mother had been enslaved by the serpents through a trick. To free her, he flew up and stole the Amrita from the gods themselves, fighting off the entire heavenly host on the way, and then handed it over as her ransom and arranged for it to be snatched back before the serpents could drink it. The snakes licked the sharp grass it had rested on in their haste and split their tongues, which is why they are forked. Garuda and the serpents have not been on good terms since. The rishis, the great sages, occupy a strange middle place between human and divine. 7 of them are said to be the 7 stars of the Great Bear, up there in the northern sky, circling. What gives them power is tapas, which literally means heat. It is the force accumulated by long austerity and concentration, and it works almost mechanically. Do enough of it, and power comes, regardless of whether you are good. This is precisely why the gods get nervous. Half the plots in the tradition are set in motion by somebody generating so much tapas through meditation that heaven itself starts to feel the temperature rise, and Indra has to do something about it. Vishvamitra was a king who saw a sage's wish-fulfilling cow and could not have it by force, and understood that the man's power was of a kind no army could match. So he abandoned his throne and undertook austerities for thousands of years to become a Brahmin sage himself, and was interrupted and derailed and started again, and eventually got there. The last great story I want to give you is about a river. Ganga flowed in heaven, and the earth had no such river, and a king named Bhagiratha had 60,000 ancestors whose ashes lay in a heap, unpurified, their souls unable to move on. Only the water of that heavenly river would release them. So he undertook austerities for 1,000 years to bring her down, and it was granted. But there was a problem: the force of a river falling from heaven would shatter the earth on impact. So Shiva stood beneath it and took the whole fall on his head, and the water disappeared into his matted hair and wandered there, lost, for a long time, and then he let it out gently in a stream, and it came down through the mountains, and Bhagirath walked in front of it, playing his conch, and the river followed him all the way to the sea, to the place where the ashes lay. On the way, it went straight through a sage's meditation and flooded his hermitage, and he drank the entire river in a single mouthful out of irritation, and had to be talked into letting it out again, which he did through his ear. And so it went on. The word for an effort of that kind, undertaken for 1,000 years to help people already dead, entered the language. A Bhagirath Prayatna is still the phrase for a colossal and patient undertaking on behalf of somebody else. That is why the Ganges is where it is, because a man walked and it followed, and the water in Shiva's hair is still there in every image of him, a small figure in the tangle or a spray coming out of it. Trees carry a good deal of this as well, and they are the part of the mythology you can still walk up to and touch. The Ashvatha, the sacred fig or peepal, is the tree that turns up everywhere. It is the one in the Gita growing upside down. Its leaves have long drawn-out tips, and they move in the smallest breath of air, so that the whole canopy is never quite still, which is the sound people describe sitting under them. Old ones are left standing when roads are built around them, and platforms are raised at their feet, and villages hold their meetings there. The banyan sends roots down from its own branches, and those roots thicken into new trunks, and the tree walks slowly outward across the ground over centuries, until a single organism can shade several acres and look like a forest. A tree that makes more of itself without ever quite ending is a reasonable thing to have thought was holy, and it is the leaf the child was floating on when Markandeya found him, and the tulsi. Holy basil is a small plant kept in a pot in the courtyard rather than a tree at all, tended daily, watered in the morning, associated with Vishnu, and treated less like a plant than like a member of the household who happens to live outside the door. There is one more thing I want to correct before we drift, because it is repeated everywhere. You will often hear that Hinduism has 33 million gods, or 330 million. The old texts say 33, and later ones say 33 koti. And koti does mean 10 million, but it also means kind, or class, or category. So the phrase very likely meant 33 sorts of divinity, and it got read as a number, and the number is now on every list on the internet. The truer thing, which is more interesting, is that this is a tradition in which the divine is understood to have effectively unlimited forms. Every village has its own. Every river, every hill, and also, in much of its philosophy, to be finally one thing wearing all of them, both at once, like the sleeper on the water, who is resting and awake at the same time, which is where we came in and where we are going to end. The wheel turns. The age we are in will run down, as the three before it did. Kalki will come on his white horse at the end of it, and what he ends will begin again as Satya Yuga, the age of truth, with the bull standing on all four legs, and none of the people alive. Then will remember any of this. And at the close of the day of Brahma, the fires will draw everything in, and the waters will rise and cover it, and there will be nothing anywhere but ocean. And on that ocean, the serpent floating. And on the serpent, the god, one arm folded beneath his head, his eyes closed, entirely at rest and entirely aware, with the whole of what was and what will be held quietly inside him. The 1,000 heads spread above him like a canopy, keeping off the light, nothing moving on the water, no sound anywhere. The lotus not yet grown, the morning not yet come. Only the long night between the worlds, which has happened many times and holds no danger at all. Rest as he rests. Let it be dark. Let it be quiet. Let the wheel turn without you for a while.